Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session on cultivating the future of STEM, community outreach, team building, and career training. I would really like to thank our generous conference sponsors for which these events would not be possible today. My name is Dr. Paige Greenwood, and I am a postdoctoral research fellow at Columbia University, and I am also an organizer for BlackInNeuro. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining you today from Manhattan, New York, land that belongs to the Munsee Lenape First Peoples. We are all joining this event from various places around the world, so I invite you guys to take a moment to reflect on the lands that you all may be joining from as well, and those relationships to those lands. Live captioning and American Sign Language interpreting are available for this event. To turn on captions on or off, click the CC Live Caption button, or icon along the bottom of your window. You can also adjust the size of the font by clicking on the three dots at the bottom of your window that say More and selecting Subtitle Settings. Our sign language interpreter, DeBlois, and our captioner, Jessica, should appear as panelists on your screen. If you experience any issues accessing the captions or the interpreters, please message all panelists in the chat. Additionally, if you would like to share any highlights that you've learned today on social media, you can do so using our hashtags, which are hashtag BlackInNeuroWeek 2021 or hashtag BenW21. And to keep in theme for today, which focuses on our NeuroMentors, you can use the hashtag BlackInNeuroMentors as well to stay engaged with conversations that are happening in Twitter Spaces and also on our Instagram account. There are a multitude of barriers due to systemic access or systemic factors that marginalize individuals face on a day-to-day basis. It could be in the form of lack of representation, inadequate funding when it comes to scientific research, or other gatekeeping policies. The goal of today's panel is to highlight the importance of programs that are working towards diversifying the STEM pipeline. Today, we have three incredible panelists with us. We have Sali Great from Dreamwakers, we have Dr. Devin Collins from BioBus, and Dr. Brittany Young from B360. Without further ado, we will start with our first questions for our awesome panelists. For each of you guys, we'll start with an introduction, the name, your name, of course, your program goals, and your target audience. So we'll start with Devin.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. All right. So again, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. My name is Devin Collins, and I wear several different hats. Primarily, I work as a community scientist for an organization called BioBus, based in New York. I personally am based in Brooklyn, but we operate mainly in Harlem and the Lower East Side. But also we run programs in the general New York City area. A couple of other hats that I hold are, I am a postdoc with the Rockefeller University, where I completed my PhD in behavioral neuroscience. And I also am an adjunct professor at Bard Early College, where I teach neuroscience and biology to early college students. So I'm also happy to talk a little bit about that too. But the main program goal of BioBus is I guess our vision is best described as making sure that everyone achieves their scientific potential. And I think I'll leave it at that, and we can elaborate on that a little bit later.
Thank you so much. We'll now go with Sali.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for having all of us here today. I'm really excited to hear from both Devin and Brittany as well. I'm Salit. I'm a senior program manager at Dreamwakers. And a little bit about who I am is that I grew up in a really small town. My dad is Nigerian. My mom is Midwestern American, and they decided to raise us on a rural dairy farm. And so growing up, I just didn't really know what there was out there for me to do in terms of career or what I could even achieve. And I didn't have the experience of seeing a lot of people who looked like me in spaces that would be interesting. And so I learned about Dreamwakers and came to work for them a couple years ago and was just really captivated by their mission. Dreamwakers works to close this opportunity gap. So we're really looking to reach students in rural and systemically under-resourced schools and to put people in front of them that look like them, that are diverse and relatable and have really interesting career paths that can speak to the opportunities that students could then have. So we really just believe in providing that positive exposure to role models and careers, hoping that that will inspire the next generation to say like, oh yeah, like they came from where I came from and I could see myself doing that. And here are the steps that I need to do to reach that potential. So I'm sure I'll share more about exactly how we do that. But thanks again for having us here today.
Thank you so much for that. We will now go to Brittany.
Yep. I'm Brittany Young. I'm from Baltimore, born and raised, never leaving. And so my background is in engineering. So I worked anywhere from planetary research science to medical devices, prototyping, asset management, engineering management, and I'm proud to be retired. Now I'm the founder of B360. So all across the country, people ride dirt bikes in traffic. Unlike skateboarding, unlike bicycling, is no places to go. In Baltimore, it can be a misdemeanor, and in a lot of cities, they're actually making dirt bike police task force. What a lot of people saw was a bad thing. We saw was a perfect opportunity to get kids who are usually not interested in STEM by making it more cool, making it more fun. And so our programming in B360 transitions riders out of traffic to help them fix and repair bikes. And so far, it's been 8,000 kids. It's been 36 dirt bike rides and growing. And about 2 weeks ago, we were even on Nike's page. So really shifting not just education, but the sport, and then making sure for Black people in cities around the country, we have places that look like us for us.
Thank you guys so much for being here. We're so excited to hear from you all about more about your programs. But I'll shift into the question of why did you guys feel that there was a need for the organization that you are part of in your communities? What was a big driving factor for that?
Yeah, so, and I realized I left out half of the question that you asked me before. So our target audience is actually K through 12 and college students in the New York area. And our mission, basically, we are focusing, and I think this gets a little bit more into the second question, in New York City, especially when you look at the school system, most of our students are students of color. Most of our students are students who are not, privileged to have been born into things like wealth and power. And so we really want to focus on bringing science to people, to students, families, just generally people who have been historically excluded from the enterprise of science and scientific community because of things like race, economics, gender, and actually something that we've really gotten into, and that's sort of the driving force, and pardon the pun because the name is BioBus, but one of the driving forces for inequality that we see is geography as well. So students, even though, New York is a hub of scientific research, of scientific community, we have several, August institutions. I myself went to Rockefeller, all of the scientific activity that's going on here is not accessible to a lot of our young people. And so we decided, instead of bringing the kids to a museum, instead of bringing them to university and putting the burden on schools and the students themselves and overworked teachers to get them out into the science, we're going to bring the science to them. So we outfitted literal buses with microscopes and different scientific tools and samples and scientists like us. And we go to the schools and do the science right there in the place where the students are. And so, seeing that lack of just not even, all other things equal, just the physical access that students in, deep parts of the city with inadequate infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, or if you think about students in rural communities, they're just not able to get there, even if they have the aptitude, even if they have, the desire to participate in science. It's just difficult and costly and timely and time consuming to get there. So that was really a major driving force for us.
I mean, similar to Devin, what you were just sharing, Dreamwakers, we're targeting 4th through 12th grade students, and we're aiming to meet them where they are. A lot of schools, a lot of communities can't bring in speakers from various backgrounds into their school physically, especially during COVID, but even during normal times. If you're living in a really rural space, or you're trying to juggle a million other things as an educator, you can't always have the time to do all that outreach to bring in a speaker. So Dreamwakers really decided, we're going to stand in that gap. We're going to say we have access to internet. Most schools in the States at least have internet that could do a Google Meet or a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams meeting. And that's where we're bringing in the speakers to have a conversation really with a classroom. And we believe that this is super important to have nationwide. We're based out of Washington, D.C., but we work in all 50 states. We have based our research or based our work in studies that show that approximately 7 in 10 employers believe that they have talent shortages in their fields. And that's 3 times higher than a decade ago, which is huge. And another study felt that, or students reported that more than 50% felt that they didn't have a good grasp of career opportunities and the education requirements that they would need to achieve those careers. So there's just a huge gap there that we think can be helped by putting people in front of them that can tell them, like, here's what you can do. Here's the degrees you can get. Here are some of the internship opportunities that I experienced. Here's my email address. Email me and let's continue this conversation. So really just trying to focus on creating a meaningful conversation that a student that can spark something in a student who can then decide to pursue that later on.
And we got started right after the Sali Great uprising, because I noticed 2 main problems in Baltimore, but around the country. So in Baltimore, we have over 122,000 mid-level degrees that don't require a 4-year degree. But often people say, you go to college or you get a textbook thrown at you saying this is how you learn STEM. But people never say actually people are already smart and they're doing things that are related. And a mechanic and a mechanical engineer aren't really different. One has a finished product every day, which is a car. Another one goes to school and learn a theory. And so we united both of those sides to teach engineering. And the second problem that we tackle is really one to have programmatic solutions for nonviolent offenses. So right now, we just launched a diversion program here in Baltimore. So instead of people going to jail for nonviolent sentences, they do training with B360 to secure jobs and education opportunities. So we're really filling 2 voids. Of course, the need for more Black professionals in STEM, but reshaping what STEM looks like in real time, it's not all just 4-year degrees, it's some technical experience. It can be both, it can be neither. And then also making sure for nonviolent sentences and pending charges, people have the opportunity to do training program and not rely on police. That's really B360 in a nutshell and why we got started.
Awesome. I feel like all of you guys' programs missions are so incredible, and you're making such a difference in the lives of young people, Black people who deserve these opportunities and deserve access to those opportunities. But when creating, collaborations with communities, there's often, when it comes to science, there's often a distrust of folks coming in and disrupting what's already, in place. So how did you guys create successful collaborations within the community and really build up your organization in that way?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because there is so much, because of the historical wrongs that have been done against Black people and Black bodies, Black communities. It is really tough, even though we understand, I think there's an intrinsic or inherent understanding of the value of science and scientific education. There's so much, I think for me, right, I'm a PhD, I'm a neuroscientist, but what I thought I wanted to be was a psychiatrist or neurologist. My interest in the brain would take me into one of those more obvious paths for success that a lot of students, Black students especially, and students of color generally have. And I think that one thing that we really prioritize is student voice. We try not to make that mistake that so many different outreach organizations can make. That's really easy, by no fault of their own, just because of the way that science and academia is set up. Is, I'm going to come in and teach you something, and I have something you need. But really, it's so much more. The road goes 2 ways, right? they're resources we absolutely can provide to young people, but we have, you know, as trite as that can sound, we have a lot to learn from them. And so one thing we really want to do is prioritize and value and celebrate student voice. So really asking them, what do they want to learn about? What are the students interested in? Not what we think that they should be learning, but what are their own scientific interests? Because it's really, and I think for a lot of us, our own curiosity that really fueled our entry and the joy of discovery that we get from science. And so if we are coming in telling students what they want, then we lose them before we even had them. So really prioritizing that student voice is one thing that we like to do. The other thing is finding multiple points of entry. So the most obvious is always, you know, we work closely with schools, especially with the NYC DOE. And so it's often, you know, teachers, principals, assistant principals, superintendents who are bringing us in to work with their students. And, you know, they're the ones paying for it. They're the ones at least like, you know, arranging everything. And so, you know, that's one thing, but we also try to think about the students as whole individuals. So they're not just in their classrooms with their teachers, they're also with their parents, right? They're also going to church. They're also going to be interfacing with community organizations, you know, community centers, boys and girls clubs, things like that. And so we also work really, really hard to cultivate relationships with different CBOs, different community-based organizations, so that we can find the students where they are, not just when they're at school, but when they're at home, when they're in their communities, when they're worshiping, when they're doing whatever it is that they're doing that's important to them, or a major part of their lives. And we try not only, you know, beyond that, like not only forging relationship with the students themselves, but involving their families, finding out what their families care about, arranging, or, you know, activities that giving students activities they can do at home with their families, with their, you know, with their church groups, all of those different, you know, again, those points of entry that we can hit, and really prizing that voice of the students and the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us here recognize that representation matters. Like that's very clear to all of us, especially as marginalized individuals. And at Dreamwakers, we are really passionate about making sure the match makes sense. And so similar to what Devin's saying, like we want to hear from your classrooms. If you're a teacher and you come to us and you say, hey, we want to match with a speaker, you know, say it's a teacher who teaches coding. And they're like, we want to talk to somebody about coding. Well, awesome. Like make sure that that's what your students are interested in as well. And then we give them the background of the speaker and their bio. And we say, you know, have your students sit with this, Google them, think of questions, and then come to this conversation ready to engage in that way. And I think that's super important also, just beyond matching on race and ethnicity, but hitting on, you know, school location and match based on geography. If there's a students in, say we work with students in rural Kansas, you know, and if we're putting a speaker in front of them who grew up in New York City, born and raised, and has no connection to that, the students are more likely to check out. So we're really doing this work to make sure that the students are interested and engaged, and we're putting someone in front of them that they can be curious about and have questions for. And in addition to that, we're also making sure that we're pulling on a pool of speakers and finding educators who are bought into the mission, who believe in it also, because that's super important. If you know, if you're a teacher in a classroom and you want to get your classroom excited about it, you have to be excited about it too. So that's a big thing when we're doing our outreach or we're talking with new educators. It's like, why are you here? You know, what drew you to Dreamwakers? What are you most excited about? And what do you think is going to resonate with your students? And that makes a much more successful conversation in that way as well. And same with our speakers. I mean, people can be wonderfully accomplished and freeze up in the middle of a classroom. So it's a very different, you know, a boardroom is not a classroom. And so it's just a very different way and style of communicating, especially, I mean, now people are professionals with Zoom, but, you know, back when we started 6 years ago, it was unfamiliar territory to come into a room, you know, on a Google Meet and try and connect. So being able to connect via Zoom in that way, it just requires a lot of conversation and just making sure that we're getting the right people and keeping the right people in our network. And then also that we're making sure that we're meeting the students where they are and giving them that opportunity to actually have a meaningful conversation.
Yep. And I agree with everything that was already said. For B360, what we did was very meticulous. So I also was a teacher for 2 years before we started B360 because I was bored, I guess. But I really wanted to know what it felt like to be in a classroom teaching technology. And that really gave me a whole new insight. And so we went, of course, first to our students about the curriculum to make sure we had buy-in. We didn't assume. I asked questions. I wanted to hear from them that what we were doing was the right thing. Next, we went to dirt bike riders so to get that consent, that buy-in, but also to recruit instructors. So all of B360 classes are taught by Black STEM professionals from Baltimore and or Black dirt bike riders from Baltimore City as well for that reason. And then to extend community even further, we went to like our police department to get, of course, buy-in amnesty. And then the last leg was having like buy-in from the community. So doing surveys, community forums, really making sure we were very specific and had a procedure and, testing our assumptions before we even launched. And now how that shows up, a lot of the riders we had when they were 17 and now 21 and 22, they're the managers of other riders. They run programming, they're the program coordinators. Our younger students are like mentors to even younger students. And they also sit on our boards and our advisory councils. And if you ever looked at like any of our media as well, while we're really integrating community, it's because we have created a platform for them to also speak and to shine light. So similar to what everyone said is we never assumed that, I knew everything, like it was my idea, but it wasn't mine to keep and to lead. And I appreciate that every day I get to learn from them. And we have intentional listening sessions just to make sure, we're still looking at our North Star, we're still aligned to where we plan to go. And we, of course, lead with empathy, which I think has been our biggest skill set of not only just hearing from kids and riders, but, we also hear from police officers and community members. And I think that is how you build a rapport, but that's also what's made us successful in continuing this ride for so long.
I love what you just said about leading with empathy. I feel like there's been so much harm done to our communities that a lot of times people aren't going into our communities with the right intentions or really trying to understand our perspectives of why we feel the way we do. And all of you all have incorporated into your programs that there's an importance for these kids, community leaders, advisory committees to have a voice in how things go or how the program's being taught. And I think that's really, really essential to carry out, programs. But shifting into another thing, we know that a lot of times students, low-income students have like less access to qualified teachers or STEM professionals. There's inadequate funding sources. We keep getting funding cuts for STEM programs. There's just so many issues that are keeping us from being able to elevate ourselves or, go to that next stage. So I feel like you guys have talked a little bit about some of these solutions, but how did you go about creating pragmatic solutions to solve those systemic issues with your program?
Yeah, this is also a really wonderful question. I think one thing I didn't touch on before is, it's really tough, like you said, to get a lot of quality instruction, for students. And one thing that we focus on, I mentioned that we focus on K through 12 students. So we do a lot of teaching and, having them come in and do science with us. But another face of our organization is really, getting students to understand not only that there is a pipeline, right? but really getting them prepared in meaningful ways for both participating in science, but also leading in science. So really, we want to train up the next generation. And we do that in a couple of different ways. So beyond our K through 12 programs, we also have college internships. We also do have internships for high school students as well. But one really key thing that we think works just immaculately well for us is that our students who participate in our high school and college internships in turn become teachers within our programs. So they do things like designing curriculum. They teach classes to the younger students in middle school and younger, or for our college interns, they work with our high school interns. They do their own independent science projects, but they also can turn around and teach their near peers. And this, we find does a couple of different things. And I think it's one of the more obvious things is that it's useful to see yourself reflected, right? You can't be what you can't see. And especially because they're near peers, they, you know, their concerns are similar enough, or they're proximal enough in time that, you know, they can really have meaningful conversations that I couldn't necessarily have with a middle schooler like I would have been able to do a decade and a half ago, you know? And so that's been a really powerful part of making our program successful, and really getting at that issue of just not enough caring, empathetic instruction for young scientists. I would say the other thing that we have been able to do is lower barriers for entry. For example, our internships are completely free. We never charge students to be a part of our programs. In fact, we pay them. And so, you know, another thing beyond even getting the opportunity may be there for students, but if it's, you know, if it's doing the science program or getting a summer job to help out your family or save money or just to have money at all, right? Which is a huge concern for a lot of young people, especially young Black people. You know, we want to make sure that you don't have to choose between being able to make money, being able to get, you know, have opportunities to get jobs on your resume, you know, and doing programs with us. So we really treat this as an opportunity where they can get real work experience that is about something that they really care about. And then, you know, all of our interns are from the communities that we serve. And so there's a real, you know, a direct investment back into the communities. So, you know, they get to get, and they also get to give.
That's great. So for Dreamwakers, one of the biggest issues that we face as an organization that leans heavily on volunteers is that it skews towards white women. That's just the largest population of people who tend to volunteer. And so we have had to make a very conscious effort to say we are going to find the great folks out there that we know exist, and we're going to bring them into our community. We're going to say, hey, we want you because you can inspire the next generation. And so that does mean a little bit of extra legwork on our end. It's not, you know, a lot of folks don't necessarily have that privilege to be able to donate a bunch of their time. But what's really beautiful about what we do is that you can have our conversations are 45 minutes. So a lot of people slot it into their lunch break or take, you know, a meeting hour and dedicate it to doing one of these conversations. So we do our best to reach out to corporate affinity groups, or, you know, universities who've got PhD students or first-gen college students who are folks of color, and specifically Black folks who can give that hour of their time to connecting. So that's one of the things that we've really had to focus on and to make important to us. And I think we're also, you know, I've already mentioned, but in our educator outreach, making sure that we're finding educators who are just dedicated holistically to social justice and to bringing in these speakers for the right reasons, and not just using this as like a checkbox, but they're actually invested in the long-term development of the students that are in their classroom. And you know, I also just want to mention that we're under no illusions that a nonprofit is going to fix all of the problems that we have. This is not the only solution. You know, we collectively as a society have these internalized systemic issues that are going to require changes that are much bigger than any one program. But our hope is really that we're just standing in the gap for just a few of those students, for just a few people to be able to have that spark, which is why we're completely free. Our services are totally free for schools where 50% or more of their student population is eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So those are the schools that we're really hyper focused on reaching. And we get a lot of other schools who are a little bit more affluent, who are like, how much can I pay for these? And what can I, you know, how can we get involved? And we love that this resonates with so many people, but as a small growing organization, we are just trying to remain really hyper focused on the populations that we set out to serve. And we're really committed to keeping that to be true, you know, even as we grow.
And I appreciate hearing that also. For us, one of the most direct ways we've kind of like disrupted the prison pipeline and reworked the system / blow it up is through our diversion program. So like I touched on this earlier, in Baltimore, it can be a misdemeanor for possession of a dirt bike. Now in Baltimore City, we have a diversion program through B360. This means for anything that's nonviolent in Baltimore, you do programming with B360 and training. So at least 25 hours to get a skill, and then we pipeline you to either a job with us as an instructor or like continue the cycle, or with our community partners who range from like tech companies to other startups. So directly putting jobs and access in people's hands who sometimes would have went to jail for something nonviolent. And that's very important because, you know, around the country, people are trying to figure this out. And we just did it as a nonprofit organization this year. So hopefully we'll be able to have more diversion programs and lead in that space. The second is really reshaping the industry through our programming. I think we've all had that experience of being excited and ready for STEM and wanting to go into these industries with our dream jobs and then getting there and realizing that STEM wasn't ready for us. So what B360 does too is work intentionally with the companies that we're hiring. You know, so if like our students are working for you, you have to go through a training before they come to you, because we need to lessen the burden that is not on us as Black people in STEM to solve racism. It is on the companies to make their systems better and to have more equality and to have better like a better culture and a rapport to receive us. So that's what we've been doing is listening towards, and our students actually do the trainings directly, which I'm really proud of. And I would just say overall, like our programming is really designed to make sure that people just come from different backgrounds, have access to opportunities, and that we grow them from the ground up with what they already been doing. And I can confidently say we've reduced nonviolent crimes in Baltimore by 81% since 2017 when we got started. And by doing the work that we've done, we've saved Baltimore $1.3 million. And in the next 5 years, we're saving the city $233 million by doing programming instead of incarceration. And so that's what I mean about, you know, you blow the system up a little bit, but it has higher yield results. And that is the important part of like all of our programming as Black leaders in these spaces, is to make sure we keep making a wave, but to also keep making sure we show cities, we show governments, we show ourselves that we can invest in us and we are the fruits of what's going to happen when we do.
Grassroots. I love that so much. And I'm sure everybody on this call is curious about how do they get involved in volunteering for your organization or participating in, what do those training opportunities look like for them?
Yeah, I can say that our our entire operation is predicated upon building scientific community, right? And so a huge part of everything that we do involves volunteers. And so we have a really robust volunteer program. They were especially crucial for us during the past year as we have coped with the COVID pandemic, because we took everything completely virtual. And whereas that would normally be something that would we joke that our bread and butter is our buses. So when we can't take our buses somewhere, then what do we do? And so this response really presented us with an opportunity to leverage our volunteer network in a way we hadn't before. And so, like as was said earlier, a lot of our volunteers, instead of needing to commit a chunk of hours, could sneak something in their lunch hour, or right after work, or right before work, or whenever they get a chance, while they're waiting for an incubation, while they're doing whatever it is, at the lab bench. And so we were able to have them join classes, expand our reach, talk to students all over the place, and we were able to organize something we called Meet a Scientist, where students could just like spend 45 minutes, an hour or so talking to different scientists, and that was really that would not have been possible without our volunteer network. And so one thing that we do to make sure that those volunteers are ready is exactly what Brittany mentioned. We make sure that our volunteers are, not that our students are ready for the volunteers, but the volunteers are ready for the students. And so we have, several hours of training that they go through. Our volunteer coordinator, one of my colleagues, he has a standard set of presentations that they go through, some activities that volunteers need to go through before they are ready to work with the students, so that we're all sort of on the same page. What are we trying to accomplish? What do the students need, and what do we need to learn from the students? So and as I mentioned before, a lot of our volunteers become our mentees. So we have high school students and college students who just want to get involved, but they end up doing internships with us, and then they get to be involved in multiple different facets of working with the organization in that way. So yeah, that's our volunteers are crucial to what we do.
Yeah, similarly, as I mentioned, volunteers are what we thrive off of. I'd say word of mouth is really our biggest advocate when it comes to recruiting new volunteers. Folks come, they do what we call our conversations flash chats. They do one flash chat, they tell their friends, they tweet about it, and then we get more of their network involved, which is amazing. We love seeing that they're resonating with the work they're doing and that they are loving it so much that they're sharing it with people outside of the immediate circles. So we generally get applications for speakers who want to join us, and my colleague will reach out to them and we give them some kind of tips and tricks. As I mentioned, a boardroom or a lab is very different than talking to a room of fourth graders. So we give them some ideas of how they might be able to best engage. Sometimes that might mean making a presentation or bringing some photos. We always love to have you show what's around your space. We've done some really cool lab visits. So we'll have you walk around and show us what's in your space. What does your day-to-day working environment look like? And so the students can kind of get a feel for that as well. So we're really just kind of prepping the speaker for any eventual situation they might run into as they're speaking to a classroom. And then on the flip side, with our educator partners, I feel like I've talked a lot about that, about prepping our educators and making sure that they're invested and involved. And we often hear that, they tell their principals or they tell their district officials, and then we can get a more robust partnership started with more people throughout their schools. And then we also work with summer and after school programs. So, if we have folks that are interested in doing this and they only have a couple hours with their students each week, we're happy to slot in and kind of here's a flash chat, and then this is the lesson you can do with the students afterwards to carry on that learning and to figure out what it is that they took away from that conversation. So that's us.
At first, we kind of already talked about this too. What we're really big on is the trainer model. So we get a lot of intake just from word of mouth. So people just reach out all day. We have a form that you fill out. So anything ranging from, making sure you can actually work with kids to what level of experience do you have. And for anyone over 16, we usually hire them and train them anyway. So we put them in our workforce program. So they go through the same curriculum as our little kids first. And then when we add to it is classroom engagement experience. And then they shadow a teacher for a day. So right now we have 11 rec centers we're working out of. In those rec centers, we have 5 people who are being trained as instructors. And then when they get done for this summer, they'll be ready to go into a classroom on their own. And that's been really important because you learn with kids. And if you can work with kids, you can do anything. 2, you get hands-on experience and it's fun. But 3 is really just making sure they feel comfortable in their best selves. But we have a lot of great volunteers that we are proud to support. And then we like when the people transition from volunteering to actually working with us because that keeps them engaged.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And for the audience, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A chat and we will make sure that we get to them. I want to shift gears. So when working with underrepresented populations or underrepresented youth, what were some really valuable takeaways that you learned when conducting that outreach?
Yeah, I think that one thing, again, kind of returning to a point I made before, is really understanding the value of student voice. So, a couple of practical things that we do is, we're a very service-based organization. We come in and we do lessons and classes with students, primarily, in the setting of schools and CBOs. And so, of course, we like to get some feedback from the teachers. What did we do well? How much did your students enjoy? Are they talking about it after? Did we get some quotes or whatever? But we also have surveys for our students. And we really value that data from the students themselves because they are at times very brutally honest. They are very, they are very excessive with their praise, and they are very cutting when they don't like something. And so one of the biggest takeaways we have gotten from our work is that it's not just seeing the kids who are just amazed and wowed by everything, but the kid who's kind of laying back and not so into it. There's a lot to learn from that kid too. And so again, like when I say student voice, I'm not just talking about the voices that are singing our praises. I'm talking about the ones who are not so loud, you know, or not saying the things that we want to hear, but saying the things that we need to hear. I think that's one of the main things, at least for me personally. I think another thing is that we can't underestimate the value of, I think there are a couple of things that have been said about word of mouth for volunteers and for, you know, getting teachers to talk to other teachers, but our students also talk to other students. And it's been really amazing to see how much that word of mouth, not just from the adults we're working with in our communities and those collaborations that are a little bit more formal, but those word of mouth networks are at all levels. And so, you know, I had, just anecdotally, we did our first live in-person event of the year since the pandemic back in April, our first large public event. And there were some students walking by and they saw one of our buses parked out of a school on the Lower East Side. And they said, "Oh, that's the bio bus. You never heard of the bio bus before? They come to my school all the time." And it was so magical, you know, and that was one of the first times I personally overheard students talking in that way. But it's something learning from my colleagues that has happened just over the entire, you know, history of the organization. And so really understanding how students are you know, serving to further our endeavor is really important. Understanding how to leverage that, I think, is something that we have been focusing more and more on, and I'm trying to find new ways to work into what we're doing.
Yeah, so some of the biggest takeaways that I have from this work is, you know, something magical happens when there's a classroom and a speaker that's willing to be like authentic. You know, students are gonna ask hard questions, and we run into a lot of situations where speakers actually stumped. They're like, okay, let me think about that. And when they answer honestly and they go into the depths of like, here's the struggles I had to overcome, and you know, here are the highs and lows genuinely about my career and the career path that I chose, you know, and here's what it's like when I'm, you know, the only Black woman in the room or the only person of color in my whole company. And these questions that students ask that are answered authentically really open up these doors to having a conversation that they can take so much from. And I think, you know, similarly, we do after each flash chat, we ask the students, you know, what did you think about this? We have them give us verbal feedback. And then we also ask them, you know, do you want to learn more about something like this, a career like this after today's conversation? Are you feeling more confident? You know, we try to take away a few questions from them so that we can apply that to the next conversation, and we can give that feedback to a speaker of like, here's what really resonated and here's what didn't. We also follow up with our educators and ask them to complete a survey as well, just based on engagement and, you know, did students keep talking about it afterwards? And, you know, will this build into your lesson plans? Those sorts of questions. And so I think there's just so much to learn from students. I mean, to Devin's point, like they will be mean, they will be truthful when you need to hear it, and they'll also, you know, they'll give you praise when it's earned. So there's just so much to learn, and I just love our community and the people who buy in and are willing to have these sometimes really challenging conversations. I think means a lot to the students who are involved in them.
And I honestly echo all the takeaways that were just said too. So it feels good to know we all share the same practices. And I would say one thing too that we're really big on is like asset language and framing and narrative control. So we don't use like underrepresented, low income, or any of those things either, just because, you know, we speak truth to power. So I would never tell a kid, oh, we save you, or, you know, what is low income? If you are low income, you don't consider yourself that. So that's really one of the big things that we also put into not just our curriculum, but just into like we mentor and we speak to people, is making sure they have the tools to engage themselves. You know, that people should know there's a privilege to work with them, to speak with them. And like, honestly, our students and our young people are our best advocates. So we always make sure that we just really praise them for who they are. Make sure they know their worth and their value. So when they walk into rooms, they can take up all of the space and not have to worry about being received, but they receive themselves, and that's more than enough. And so that would just be my only, you know, charge to everyone too, is making sure we speak truth to power to the young people we're working with, to make sure we continue to frame things in an asset language, to make sure they also know their value and their worth, because we have a lot to offer.
Yes, and thank you for that. You know, the language matters so much. You know, you never want Black children, children of color to feel out of place, or that they're within this really small subsuit that's just not going to make it. So I appreciate you saying that. We know that these programs have to be sustained with funding. There's great to have volunteers. It's great to have community engagement and folks who are willing to put their time in. But when it comes to funding, like, what were some of the mechanisms that you all, went after in order to reach your program goals and sustain your program? And what were some of the steps for applying for those funding mechanisms?
Yeah, I think a few things that we do, we try to make sure that our funding sources are as diverse as possible. And for us, we are really fortunate that we are at the intersection of a couple of different funding streams. So that, of course, these may not be appropriate for all organizations. They may not be accessible to all organizations. But we really, looking at a list of our funders, we really focus on making large-scale partnerships with biotech companies. So one of our biggest supporters is Regeneron, and we try to make sure that we sustain our relationship there and that it's a two-way street. And so one of the things that we really work hard on is not, we understand that our organization has a lot of value, not just to students and educators, but also to other organizations, other industries who are trying, at least at face value, to do right by students and historically excluded populations. And so part and parcel of our interactions with those larger companies is that we help train up their outreach organizations, their outreach branches to do work like what we do. We help them understand, and this is again another place where a lot of our volunteers come from, is we teach them to work with just youth in general, how to take it from the boardroom or from the lab to the classroom or to the scientific space, whatever it is. And so we work a lot with them so that our, not only is it the value, that they can put into their annual report, hey, we did this and we donated this much, but look at what the other value that we are extracting from this partnership. So, those large companies are a big source for our funding. We also work very closely with different multi-scale foundational partnerships. So Simon's Foundation is a huge part of our funding stream. We also work with the Pinkerton Foundation, which works with a lot of different science outreach groups here in New York. And then beyond that, we are just, through a lot of effort, we're able to cultivate a lot of different donor relationships. So, beyond like those large donations from wealthy individuals, we just, every dollar helps. and as much, we have teachers, a teacher friend of mine from the school where I work, she gave $25 because she believed in the mission. So really understanding that wherever the funding is coming from, where, it is really important. The other thing I can say, is that we also worked really hard to cultivate relationships with the city of New York from the beginning. And so as soon as we could, we became a recognized vendor with the mayor's office. And so that, that lowers the barrier for working not only with schools, because we're recognized by the city and a lot of that funding is coming from the city itself, but we also are able to, work with government agencies. So for example, the Department of Youth and Career Development here in New York is a division of the mayor's office, and we're able to work with them, partner with different CBOs, become subcontractors on those grants, and working very closely with those government officials. They also, again, through word of mouth, they hear about programs, they see us at different city events, and they contact us. And I should say, I've gotten into this work with BioBus a little bit later into the history of the organization. So, a lot of the legwork that went into putting these relationships together has already been done, and I'm just reaping the benefits. I get to like help manage these things instead of really working to put them together, from the ground up. But those are, that's some of the work that's already been put in. Two other things I can say are, or at least one other thing I can say is that we also work, trying to think about how best to phrase this. You know what? I'm gonna let the other I'm gonna let the other two panelists speak a little bit. I am taking up a lot of the time, but maybe I can come back to a couple of other things too.
Great. So Dreamwakers, we're a nonprofit. So obviously gifts from individual donors is a big bulk of where we get our funding. That's really where our community kind of grassroots word of mouth shines. They really tell their friends and people get involved in that way. But our corporate partnership program is really the heart and soul of where our funding comes from. We work with outstanding private sector leaders to really bring their passion and their purpose into classrooms around the country. So Autodesk comes to mind. Their staff got really excited about Dreamwakers, so they recruit a bunch of their speakers, and we're able to connect them with classrooms. And by these corporate partners joining with Dreamwakers, these companies are really able to get a leg up as well. You know, they're getting into classrooms where they get to share with the next generation of young talent. You know, they can encourage them that this is an industry that's open to them, that will do the work of making them feel welcome. It really helps that opportunity gap issue. We're really working to diminish that gap and to expose this wide array of careers to these young future leaders. And then it really kind of shines a light on the talent and sort of public service of the star employees. You know, a company can say, like, these are my outstanding volunteer employees, and this is the work that they've done to reach audiences really around the country. And then we're really trying to be in all 50 states. We're a national organization, and we want to say, our employees are giving back to these communities, and they're also looking to recruit from everywhere in the United States, and not just city centers, but those rural spaces as well. And they can do that recruiting, and they can do that encouragement to students without ever even leaving an office. So that's kind of our funding model is really based around corporate partnerships.
And ours is a lot unique, a little unique, because I'm also the founder. So, we're still very much in startup of, nickel and diamond bootstrapping. So I started B360 with my own money. I didn't really have like the luxury to wait on philanthropy. And I got told a lot of no's, as you can imagine, dirt bikes and STEM, philanthropy does not look like me. And I just was like, okay, I'm not going to wait for y'all to give us money. I'm just going to take my own money and do what I need to do. And with that, that's what also made us rely heavily on like service contracts. So that means that we work with schools, we work with governments, anyone that will have us to do programming. So like our rec centers here in Baltimore are one of our biggest contracts. Our school system is our second, and then we work with just a lot of organizations. And then we also have a for-profit side. So we do consulting with cities. So like New York, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Atlanta, anywhere in the country who has dirt bike riders that are interested in a programmatic solution and results. We want to work with them and intentionally. And then lastly, we also do like motorsports and events. So the same way that people do X Games and ride in the Olympics, we want to have this industry for Black dirt bike riders in cities. And so we've done about 7 events so far, and like Red Bull and Toyota are 2 of our clients on that end. So our funding streams are really not really heavily relied on philanthropy, more direct service and contract services. In 2020, we just got grant funding, our first being like Microsoft, which is cool, but we're trying to like grow more in Baltimore, and then really wanting to see in the next 3 to 5 years more ed tech solutions and products. So I want to manufacture helmets, I want to manufacture dirt bikes, I want to manufacture equipment, and I really want to package up our curriculum to be able to sell all across the country. So really not relying again like on, like nonprofit structure for sure, but more of like business model to keep growing and to make sure it's sustainable beyond me being a founder of B360.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. I'm now going to shift into some of the questions from the audience. We have one for Devin. How do you balance being a postdoc, adjunct faculty, and doing BioBuzz? Do you feel there's pressure to focus on your science rather than your outreach work? And the last part is I feel like I'm consistently told I have to pick one or the other. So could you weigh in on that, please?
Yeah, I think the answer is as best I can is how I balance it, because it's a lot, but I think that those are all things that are so central to my identity as a scientist that I have to honor all of those. I think that the myth that you have to choose one it's such a big lie that we are taught because of the different dogmatic ways of thinking about in all of those different industries, all of those different sectors is I don't know, it's just those things have been built up over time. So, you have in the research world, like you're selling out somehow if you go into industry, or if you're in industry, like you're there and you're bound by, and in many different ways, in many different places, of course, right? We are bound by the tenets of capitalism and the forces that grow out of that. And then if you are in outreach, then everything has to be mission driven. We can't make profit. We can't want to make salaries that reflect the amount of work that we're doing, right? We have to choose one, and you have to deal with whatever else. I'm not being very practical right now, but I would say that, I've been very, the way that I've gone about these things is whenever I can sort of like leverage them against one or off of one another, that's what I do. During my graduate program, we actually didn't have a teaching requirement just because of the way that the program is set up. And so that was something that was always very important to me. I realized, some of my happiest times, of course, are that, that vaunted, I'm the first person to know this. When I see my data, only I know this and nobody else does. And isn't that a special moment? That's all great. But like, eventually I got to write the paper. I got to tell my PI, I got to do whatever. The most exciting times for me, though, is when I was acting as a teacher and mentor. And that means something to me. And so what better way to do science than to teach other people science? And so, I was fortunate enough to kind of learn early, okay, every opportunity I have to bring in a summer intern, to bring in somebody to shadow, to do outreach with my wonderful colleagues at Rock EDU, the outreach arm of Rockefeller University, I'm going to do it because it makes me a stronger scientist. And when I'm giving that presentation to my PI, or when I am talking to a potential funder, or when I am doing a PD for teachers, like that educator in me is strengthening the scientist or the businessman or the nonprofit official. You know what I mean? It's all of those things feed in. So I think instead of picking one, at least the way that I conceive of it is how can I be all three at the same time? and that is, I'm sorry, I feel like that's not as practical as an answer as we may need. But the other thing I can say is that I've also cultivated relationships with organizations that are very, that are multifaceted. Bard College prides itself on bringing in practitioners to the early colleges. And so my research is a very core piece of being an effective educator to them. And in my graduate work and my postdoc work, my university also prizes, the Rockefellers are some of the first philanthropists. And so, the entire organization is sort of built, the university is built on philanthropy. And so I've been lucky that, all the other foibles of this kind of organization aside, that one of the founding tenets and one of the things that the university recognizes as valuable is giving back to the community in a particular way, maybe not in complete alignment with my own, but that's it. Sorry, I'm taking a lot of time.
No problem at all. We are a little bit short on time. Thank you so much for that response. We did tap 2 other questions in the chat that we won't be able to get to, but hopefully we can get to them on Twitter or ask the panelists after. But before we end, I just want each of you all to give a 1-sentence liner on what your goal is, or what do you hope for your program to accomplish in the next year?
Something we're actually very excited about is, we've been operating in New York for the past decade, but we actually are moving into New England, and one of our branches is, we're moving into, I guess, new markets, right? But we're hoping that we can expand into other parts of the country. So we're starting off with Boston, and for the same reasons as New York, so much science, so many schools, and really, a lot of students to reach. The other thing I can say is that we really want to make sure that we are a part of the recovery of students in New York, as they are not necessarily making up for things lost, but being able to get as much out of this next school year as possible. And we're really dedicated to being a part of that.
Yeah, so Dreamwakers, we're excited we're in 43 out of 50 states. So our goal is to hit 50 by the end of the year. So, Minnesota, North, South Dakota, Montana, Utah, Alaska, New Hampshire, look us up. And we're also just, again, as students most head back into the classroom in the fall, we want to be there to be a support and for the students and for the educators as just like a helpful resource and somewhere to turn when your kids need a little bit of extra inspiration.
And for B360, we're really looking forward to just keep reshaping education and reshaping like the dirt bike industry. So breaking ground on a brand new facility, so like a campus, we can do indoor and outdoor riding, take our classes, help us manufacture dirt bikes, helmets, and equipment, and have an auto body mechanic shop all at one place. So really showing again that a mechanic and a mechanical engineer aren't different, but having a space right here in our city and hopefully more cities just for us in this industry.
Thank you guys so much for all of your expertise, sharing about your incredible programs and the work that you all are doing within the community. I'm so excited to follow each of you all's journeys as you guys grow and continue to make an impact. Thank you again for our conference sponsors. Also a big thanks to our live captioner and our sign language interpreter. You guys are incredible and amazing. As a reminder, this and all of our events will be on our YouTube page. So if you missed it or you weren't able to join in on that, you can check out our YouTube page for that. You can also join the conversation on social media using hashtag BlackInNeuroMentors in order to keep up with today's events. If there are any other questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us, and I hope that you all enjoy